Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It's September 22nd, 2024. I'm your host, Nate Pike. Oh, we've got a spicy one for you tonight. We're going to go through, we're going to have a little fun. We're going to start off with a little bit of fun because you have to have fun. We're going to go through the week in Alberta politics, and then we're going to start pulling on the threads that just leave them laying around. What are you going to do but not pull on them? So we're gonna start pulling on them a little bit. It's going to get a little bit spicy. We've talked about the fact a little while now that we've got a FOIP or two, or maybe three or four. It's so hard to keep track of those little things. They just run all over the place. But we've got a FOIP that we're going to be talking about later on in the show. But first, we're going to go through our regular roundup, and things get a little I'm predicting things are going to get a little dire towards the end of the evening. So we're going to start with having a little bit of fun. We're going to talk about none other than the Derek Fildebrant, the deep fib, the hunter of children, allegedly. Because there was one other little update that came out in regard to Derek Fildebrant's court trial. We decided that we were going to go with this as our primary image for the story, just because it's so much fun. You know, he likes to say, like an old man on a porch. So that's just what came to mind. What are you going to do? But let's get into the actual details. So closing arguments were made Wednesday in Fildebrant's 3-day trial. The Crown said Derek Fildebrant, an elderly, decrepit, even 38 years old, exhibited violent behavior and should be convicted. The judge in the trial has reserved his decision until November. I'm hoping around early November. I'm just saying, birthday presents and stuff are nice. To recap a little bit from I'll take that graphic off for a sec. To recap a bit from the story that's on the screen now, the boys testified he threatened to shoot them, so they believed the cane he was holding was a rifle. That's what caused them to run. The children were honest, straightforward, and consistent, said Morton of the boys' testimony. Fildebrant got in his truck and drove after the teens while calling 911. I hope he had a wire, hands-free. He called 911, the emergency line, and continued his violent behavior by chasing the children down the street in his Ford pickup truck, said Morton. Mr. Fildebrant's words and actions that night were threatening and illogical. One of the boys, it turns out, knocked on a door and said, "Please help, please help." The exact quote is, "Please help. There's somebody that has been following us. He told us he had a gun." The boy told the lady whose last name is Lentz. Lentz testified last week that she left the boy in her home and went outside to confront the man who'd been chasing him. We did have an alternate graphic that we were thinking of using. If the Twitter machine has worked properly, we've thrown up a little bit of a poll to all of the folks to say, hey, which one do you like better? So if you're watching the show live, let us know in the chat. Which one do you like? And if you're on the Twitter machine or you're listening to this after the fact, look for the tweet. It's got the fun graphics, and let us know what you think. Moving on from there, in a story that, if only there was some way somebody could have seen it coming, it turns out Rebel News is maybe not so much with the news. I mean, we've been saying this for a while. We are very proud not journalists here at The Breakdown. And so if anybody could recognize a not journalist, it's another not journalist. And as one not journalist to another group of not journalists, it comes as no surprise that the far-right Rebel News was not eligible for the journalism tax credits. And it is so worth reading from this story as well. Because basically what happened is, back in May of 2021, Rebel News, see, I'm doing the air quotes there, applied to be designated as a qualified Canadian journalism organization. So they were trying to say, please say that we're real journalists, even though every story that we do paints us as the victim, and we start up websites to crowdfund off of it. Hey, if we could please be journalists and do that at the same time. But it was rejected by the Canadian Revenue Agency. And this is the best part. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get through this part without laughing. I promised we were going to have fun at the top of the show. They were rejected by the Canadian Revenue Agency because they found that less than 1%, of its content was original news. Now, Rebel didn't like to be told that they weren't real news folks. So they sought a judicial review in federal court. But on Wednesday, the decision came down that the agency's decision was reasonable. I'll read from the story here. McDonald's ruling notes that the Revenue Agency assessed 423 news reports from Rebel News and found that only 10 were original. She says the rest were not based on facts. Just let that one marinate for a sec, shall we? And didn't include multiple perspectives or curated content or material rewritten from other sources, which is fine. There's lots of folks who do that sort of thing, but don't call yourself a journalist. Call yourself a not journalist. Get shirts made and stuff. The official designation that they were trying to go after allows news outlets to claim the Canadian Journalism Labor Tax Credit and their subscribers to claim the Digital News Subscription Tax Credit. So, like, for example, if you have a digital news subscription to an outlet like the Globe and Mail, at the end of the year, you can say, hey, CRA, I paid, I don't know, $300 or whatever to the Globe and Mail. Can I get that money back? And the government says, yeah, you can get that money back. But you have to, in order to be an outlet that qualifies that, you have to actually do the work of journalism and news. More than apparently, I don't know what the threshold is, but I absolutely love that 1% is not enough. Now, the kicker to all of this is it's absolutely wild that Ezra Levant and Rebel News would try to say, hey, we're journalists, because in a previous court ruling back in 2014, Ezra Levant actually testified under oath that he was not a journalist. So I feel like self-evident truths and all of that. Moving on from there, and this one kind of stings. This one kind of hurts a little bit because it goes to the core of a problem that the province of Alberta in particular is dealing with. So the long and the short of it is, you might remember a couple of years ago, back in 2020, the federal government said, hey, we've got this problem with abandoned wells, or wells where company Bob's Drilling Company, if that's a real company. I'm sorry, Bob, I'm not speaking of you. I'm sure you do fantastic work. But Bob's Drilling Company goes out and they drill a well and they pull all of the oil or natural gas out of that well. And then they kind of put a little cork, probably made of metal, but a cork in the well. And they go, we'll come back to that later. And then they don't come back to it for a whole list of possible reasons. And in Alberta, this has happened a lot. Like a lot. Some estimates go as high as there is $250 billion, that's with a T, $250 billion that needs to be spent to clean up abandoned and orphaned wells. Well, the federal government back in 2020 said, hey, you know what? That seems like a really big number. We should probably get started on that sooner than later. And so they put together $1.7 billion aimed at reducing the environmental risk of all of these orphaned and abandoned wells. The other piece of it was like, hey, look, we're putting people back to work because of the pandemic. And Alberta, in typical fashion, said, yes, but we still hate you, Justin Trudeau. The money, the 1.7 was divided up between Saskatchewan, who got $400 million, BC, who got $120 million, and Alberta, who got $1 billion. That's with a B dollars. The Alberta government had agreed that they would meet a deadline for the funds to be committed to specific cleanup efforts. So it's not even that the cleanup had to be done. They had to be committed to do that well over there. That one. We're going to get that one. We're going to get Bob's well remediation services to clean up that well that's what we're going to spend this money on. The original date was March 31st, 2022. That was extended to May 15th, 2022. And the Alberta government has now officially handed back $137 million. The province of Alberta says, the feds, they never give us anything. They gave us $1 billion, and we gave back 13% of that, which is more, I'm told, than the Rebel has produced in news. But this is a really big issue, because on one hand, we have Danielle Smith complaining about the feds and how the feds never do anything for the province of Alberta. We have a real and definable problem in the province of Alberta when it comes to abandoned and orphan wells. And yet somehow we couldn't get organized enough to go, hey, those are the wells we're going to clean up. These are the people we're going to pay to do it. We just couldn't get that. One might almost think that if we weren't spending so much time disassembling healthcare in this province and redefining what education looks like in this province, maybe we could have actually spent, again, $137 million towards this environmental catastrophe that is not going away unless we throw money at it, period. Now, while all of this is going on, there's some other problems that are going on in the province of Alberta when it comes to oil and gas. Long and the short of it is over $250 million in oil and gas taxes have gone unpaid in the last half decade in Alberta. $250 million. Oil and gas companies have gone to municipalities' places and said, we're going to do things on this land. That's cool, right? And the municipalities have said, yeah, that's totes cool. But if you could just make sure pay your property taxes because you're going to be on that space, that would be delightful. And the oil and gas companies said, oh yeah, we totally will. And then they said, just kidding, we totally won't, to the tune of $250 million. One of the examples that was cited in this story from Global News is Taber. The residents of MD of Taber are on a per capita basis. Every single person in Taber is paying an extra $100 a year on their regular property taxes to cover up for the lost revenue. So every single person in the municipality of Taber who have delightful corn and a fantastic chip factory, last I looked, every single person there is having to pay an extra $100 on their property taxes, not because the MD of Taber is doing something for that money, but because the oil and gas companies aren't paying their bills. And this is where it gets really, really nuts, because Brian Jean stepped forward this week and he threw out the idea, hey, you know what? If we're having a hard time getting these companies to pay their taxes, these oil and gas companies, if they're just struggling to pay their taxes, maybe what we should do is just have them not. What if we just said maybe the oil and gas companies, maybe they don't need to pay their taxes? Jean said industry might be able to help from public finances. Might need help, sorry. Industry might need help from public finances to live up to its legal obligations, as well as lower municipal tax burdens and a lighter regulatory approach. This from the Canadian Press. I don't like sticks, I like carrots, Jean said. To stimulate activities that are necessary to protect Albertans, we might have to do some investment, and I'm not going to rule anything out. Jean said municipal taxes on energy facilities will also be scrutinized. He suggested the idea that some taxes are better than no taxes at all. They understand that the industry needs to be healthy. In order to pay municipal taxes, you have to have a tax that actually makes sense. So, to be clear, as the province of Alberta charges a premium on your car insurance, for example, and on the amount that you pay at the gas pump, and on any number of other things, well, many Albertans, 50%, are finding themselves in a position where they're living paycheck to paycheck. That's how tight things are right now. In that environment, Brian Jean is saying, hey, you know what? Instead of doing something to make sure that these companies that have made billions off of resources that are owned by Albertans. Instead of doing something like that, Brian Jean is saying, but what if we just didn't make them pay our taxes, and instead we had Albertans pay the taxes for the oil and gas company using the taxes that the government collects from Albertans? Quite the proposal from the energy minister, Brian Jean. Moving on from there, we got to talk about the bear situation. Now, for anybody who's unfamiliar, we did a really great episode. We've done, I think, 2 now. I could be wrong, where we've talked about the bear thing. We had a really great episode with an NDP MLA who's got a PhD in the bears, and so she knows all about the bears prior to her life in politics, and she was very, very generous to sit down and have a chat with us. I'm speaking, of course, of NDP MLA Sarah Elmaligi, wonderful bear expert. She knows a lot about bears. She literally has a PhD in bears. And the reason why she came on the show was because Todd Loewen said, hey, you know what? What if instead of having actual experts, if we establish that there's a grizzly bear that's problematic, if we identify that there's a grizzly bear that is just, he's listening to music too late at night, he's got one of those loud sports mufflers, he's revving it at 3:00 in the morning, he's just an unacceptable bear. Rather than have the Parks and Wildlife people deal with that bear, rather than have the experts who are trained in how to hunt and how to humanely put down a bear that is considered to be a problem bear. And obviously I'm being a little bit flippant with the mufflers and the music when we're talking about the degree of problem that a bear has to present in order to meet the threshold for being put down is actually extraordinarily high. And it's also important to take into context with that, when we're talking about bears and the sharing of spaces with the bears, there's a lot of it that has to do with we're going into their spaces. And so there's a lot more responsibility, and there's a lot of things that people could be doing to prevent negative interactions with bears. If you want to go for a deep dive on that, really go back into our back catalog and take a listen to the episode that we did with Sarah Elmaligi, because it was very, very educational. So Todd Loewen said, hey, what if instead of having the experts who have been trained and practiced in the putting down of problem bears, what if we just had a raffle? We let anybody do it. Anybody with a hunting license in Alberta, they could raise their hand and go, I'd like to kill me a bear. I have no experience. I may or may not have the right weaponry, but I'd like to give that a go, because I'm a very insecure person. I don't know. I honestly don't know why somebody would want to kill a grizzly bear, but do with that which will. Todd Loewen backed up this policy by saying 20 probably grizzlies each year. Province was putting down 20 problem grizzlies each year. And from an editorial that was published in the Rocky Mountain Outlook on September 16th, they kind of blew some big holes in Todd Loewen's argument, according to statistics quietly released by the province in late August from 2013 to 2022. So we're talking about 9 years. There were 23 grizzlies killed in self-defense and 57 for agency removal. For those counting, that's significantly fewer than Loewen's claim of 20 annual problem grizzlies and negative human interaction. During those 10 years, there were 235 killed by humans, ranging from getting hit with a vehicle, illegal kills, people thinking it was a black bear, and treaty harvest. From 2009 to 2020, there were 14 grizzly bear euthanizations in bear management areas 4, 5, and 6, which includes Canmore, Kananaskis Country, and surrounding areas. So Todd Loewen, it appears, took the number of total bears killed by humans doing dumb human shit and said, oh, this is how many bears we're putting down every year. We got these 20. We got to do something about it. The bears, they keep coming for the honey and the picnic baskets. Something must be done. The numbers don't match up. But that's not the only thing that doesn't quite match up with reality in the province of Alberta right now. we got to talk about the Green Line for a sec, because there's been a lot of rhetoric that's been thrown around on the Green Line. And there's some things that have to be sort of sorted out. We spent a lot of time on it last episode. So we're just going to do sort of a quick little damage control of some of the not truths, twisted truths that we've seen over the last little while. The first thing that we need to address is the reality that because of the way that the province chose to saber rattle and withdraw the funds for the Green Line, there are now hundreds of people who are just out of work. Their jobs have disappeared. And that's not okay. We're only 3 months away from, well, like 2.5 months away from Christmas. So it's a hell of a time to lose a contract or lose a job that you thought was going to be able to put food on the table for a good long period of time. But there's been very little conversation about those people. And people have said, well, the companies, they build in they've got their little damage control so they don't lose any money. But when we talk about the frontline workers that are no longer going to be working on this project for the projected length of time, these are people whose bottom line has been hit. And those are people that we haven't heard a whole lot of rhetoric from, certainly from the province. The province instead has focused on saying, well, it was originally going to be this big, and then we delayed it a bunch of times, and then it got shorter because stuff got more expensive because inflation is a thing, and that's just not okay. Plus, we'd really, really, really like it to go to the places that our investors would like it to go to. So we're just going to take our ball and go home. And in the last week, we saw some big decisions from the city of Calgary in regards to what was going to happen. And the main motion, the big motion that happened came on Tuesday night. And that was the question as to, does the city of Calgary begin the work of winding down the Green Line? In effect, shutting down the Green Line process. Now, this is despite the fact that there's already over $1 billion invested in work. So work's been done. $1 billion of work has been done. So this is now, well, that was nice. We're not going to use it, but look, we built some things that we'll not use. That motion to wind down the project, seek ways to transfer responsibility of the project to the province, was passed with a 10-5 vote. So 2/3 of city council said, given the terms that the province has given us, we cannot make this project work in the way that they want to, period, end of sentence. So by a vote of 10-5, we're tapping out. Now, Sonia Sharp, who absolutely isn't running for mayor, and she's absolutely not the UCP's chosen candidate to run for mayor. She put forward a motion that requested the establishment of a working group to continue discussions with representation from all three orders of government. That vote passed. And now, to be clear, this is just a vote to continue discussion. The wind down vote is done. But now we'll talk about how this all got so screwed up, I guess. That passed 8-7. And that's the vote that Danielle Smith, which is probably foreshadowing her leadership review, because that's the vote that Danielle Smith said, hey, look, if a majority of city council voted to continue looking at this whole conversation, this whole question, so, we got a majority vote. That's not nothing. Well, it's an 8-7 vote to continue conversations with all three orders of government. It's not an 8-7 vote to continue the Green Line. It's not an 8-7 vote to continue the project, because there was a 10-5 vote to shut the project down. But there's other projects that are coming. We're going to talk about those in a sec. But before we move on to those, we want to talk quickly about some of the what ifs, because one of the things that Devin Dreeshen, drink. One of the things that designation has said is, what if we did if we did it above grade? If we didn't do the tunnels, that would be cheaper because we wouldn't have to do the tunnels, so we could probably get farther. And Danielle Smith has said, "Hey, you know what? Maybe if we do it above grade, then we don't need the tunnels. Maybe we can get that Grand Central Station that I promised my husband for his birthday." No, she didn't say that. Probably. Maybe we can make it all the way go down to Seton. But the thing is, as pointed out by City Councillor Courtney Walcott, that has already been looked at. So when we take a look at the information that Councillor Walcott publicly provided, the cumulative effect of the Green Line elevated Centre Street alignment option is a loss between 160 million of the existing office, retail, and condominium stock in the corridor. This is a loss of 4.5 to 6.9% of the affected floors, or 0.9% to 1.4% of the entire building stock of all properties in the corridor. In context, a loss of this size, 4.5% to 6.9% of property, is a drop equivalent to that which occurred to the median property value in Calgary during the 2008 economic crisis. Now, there's a lot of other areas that Councillor Walcott included in that chunk of information. You can go back and pause the screen if you want to, but the reality is, putting the Green Line above ground, running it through the downtown core above ground, A, there's just not that much space for it, and B, it will have a huge negative impact on the property values. This is precisely the plan that Danielle Smith, designation, and the gentleman, the elderly gentlemen's club that is championing this model that Danielle Smith has said is the model that she believes is the best one. Now, it's also important to highlight that the UCP proposal for the Green Line also completely cuts off the north end of the city. Now, Danielle Smith has said, well, hey, but what if we just went down the Deerfoot Valley? What if we did that? Has anyone ever looked at that? And in fact, yes, it has been looked at extensively. This is another piece of information in regards to the ridership that you would see when it comes to the people who would be able to access a Deerfoot Valley alignment. And it's a lot less. And there's also a lot more barriers to entry. And one of the things that's been established when it comes to people accessing public transit is the more barriers to entry you present people with, the less likely they are to use it. The more feeder buses they have to take, the less likely they are to use it. The more transfers that they have to take, the less likely they are to use it. And the alignment that Danielle Smith is proposing for the north end of the city as something that we should look at is one that already has been looked at. And this is the great frustration of the whole Green Line debacle. It seems like every 2 or 3 years, the UCP decides that they're going to weigh in to the conversation in the exact same way that they weighed into it 2 to 3 years beforehand and reevaluate the project. And every time they do, they delay the project. And every time they delay the project, the costs for doing the project go up. Now, there are global supply chain issues and all sorts of other things that have driven the cost up as well. But there's no ignoring the fact that the consecutive decisions by the UCP government to try to reevaluate things and come to the same conclusion, it's not fiscally responsible. There's no business case for it. People won't use it if they go with the designs that are being talked about by the UCP again. Their responsibility is not a small one. It's a big one in why this project has been delayed and why these costs have gone up. And perhaps the most alarming thing about all of this project is one of the reasons that Danielle Smith has cited as being the reason why they need to get involved with the Green Line is because she has this vision of a Grand Central Station in downtown Calgary. And part of that vision is the train to Banff. And this is where everybody should be paying very close attention, because that train proposal was already looked at by the UCP. And even they recognized there was no viable business case for it. Prasad Panda rejected the proposal. Jason Kenney rejected the proposal. And the fact that in the face of all of that evidence, Danielle Smith seems to be going, well, yeah, but what if we did it anyways? At the cost of taxpayers should give everybody pause because it is not a fiscally responsible move. But I suppose it would make a really good birthday present for someone. Moving on from there. We talked last week. Oh, Danielle Smith live, except not live because she was in New York and the whole thing was pre-taped. Danielle Smith made a big announcement on September 17th, 6:50 p.m. The province bought airtime on all of the things. I don't know why, because the announcement was kind of milquetoast on its face. Certainly something that could have been announced at a press conference and not had all of that taxpayers' money put towards it. But then I guess Danny wouldn't have been able to have her big 10 minutes of dedicated camera time where you will watch. What did she announce? Well, it's weird. And it deserves a little bit of time to try to make sense of it. So in effect, what Danielle Smith announced is $8.6 billion with a B dollars of funding for the new school construction accelerator program, the SCAP. Catchy sounding, right? The plan is for this new program to create more than 200,000 new and modernized spaces for students. From the Government of Alberta's website, the School Construction Accelerator Program will deliver more than 200,000 new and modernized school student spaces. Previously approved school projects and modular classrooms will create about 50,000 new and modernized school spaces over the next 3 years. The program will create about 150,000 additional new and modernized school student spaces. This includes more than 100,000 new student spaces, more than 16,600 modernized student spaces, and more than 20,000 student spaces in new or relocated modular classrooms. And then this is where the rubber really hits the road into what was actually being announced. About 12,500 new public charter school student spaces, as well as a willingness to look into private schools. I'll let Danny address that.
Committed to the principle of providing school choice for parents, we will be using a portion of this new funding to pilot a charter school accelerator program designed to add 12,500 new charter school student spaces over the next 4 years. And finally, we are also developing a school capital pilot program for nonprofit private schools to incentivize investment in the creation of thousands of new independent school student spaces at a reduced per student cost to taxpayers.
Whoa, there it is. So, and this is where it gets fun because at no point has the Government of Alberta been able to specifically say, here's how much of this $8.6 billion is going to go to public schools. Here's how much of it is going to go to charter schools, which are kind of public, but not really. And here's how much of it is going to go to private schools. This is a huge departure, because the province of Alberta is now going to be paying to build the buildings of private schools. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the country. And this is where the details start to get even more uncomfortable, because one of the other big changes in the way that the Government of Alberta is spending this money without actually spending the money, you see, there's a little bit of accounting that's going to go on. Because all of the buildings that they build with the SCAP program is they're going to be owned by the government, which is another big change. Historically, the Government of Alberta builds a school, then hands it over to the appropriate school board, and then the school board says, "We own the building. We're going to make sure that we get the teachers and the students and the books and the computers and the." Not anymore. Now, the Government of Alberta is going to continue to own all of the buildings it's building in the SCAP program and lease them to school boards. So you see, they're not actually spending the money because they're going to keep the capital value of those projects on the books, including the liability for those projects on the books, including the maintenance of those projects, presumably on the books. So the province of Alberta has effectively announced that they're going to spend $8.6 billion to become landlords. Now, this comes at the same time as we have on the federal level, Pierre Poilievre saying, we have all of these buildings that aren't being used by the government appropriately. We should probably sell those off. So there's a little bit of dissonance in regards to should orders of government hold on to buildings that are being used in this way. But it's a major departure from how education, the provision of education, has happened in the province of Alberta because of the funding that will be going to private schools, which are, and I'm going to say it out loud, brace yourselves, overwhelmingly religious schools. There are some private schools that are not. But if you take a look at the overwhelming majority of the number of private not-for-profit schools, never mind how much salary the people who are involved in that school pull down, because there's a really creative bait and switch that goes on there. But we're talking about public funding for religious schools across the board. We're not just talking about a Catholic system that still has to take people within their catchment area. We're talking about exclusive private religious schools. That's what the province of Alberta has introduced with this massive change in how education is delivered. And there's another really important piece that's involved in this, because all of this money, this $8.6 billion, is only for the buildings. There's no money for the actual students. There's no money for the books. There's no money for the teachers. There's no money for the educational aides. And it's not a departure for Smith.
Early childhood service operators will increase to about $408 million this year in the budget. It also appears funding for private schools and early childhood centers is increasing at 4 times the rate of K-12 spending for public schools. I'm wondering if you can explain that decision and if you can break down how much of that funding is going to private schools versus the early school operators.
Sure. I don't have the breakdown in front of me at the moment, but would be very happy to follow up with you and get you some more of those details. Of course, we have a commitment as a government to ensuring that we're supporting choice in education. That's something that our government firmly believes in, and we want to make sure that there is funding available to a variety of different educational partners and providers, be they private schools, charter schools, and or others, to ensure that they can deliver programming as well. And that being said, we are also aggressively increasing operating funding to our public school divisions. We're increasing funding by 4.4%. That's just under $400 million. And of course, we come up with these assumptions based on the projections that our school boards provide to us about future enrollment needs, and we look to be able to provide funding to support that.
Now, to be clear, that clip was from March of this year. So they had allocated an additional $400 million, which isn't even enough to keep up, to be clear. They had allocated an additional $400 million of funding for students. These new spaces, there's no funding for the students, for the books, for the teachers, for the EAs. There's no new funding for any of those things. So it's a bit of a weird thing to take a victory lap on, unless, of course, you're somebody who's looking on starting a private, not-for-profit religious school, in which case, if you go to Danny, she might just buy you the building. Now, that's not the only piece that came out of the 10 minutes of taxpayer-funded airtime.
Welcome newcomers who possess our shared values, and we will continue to do so. Welcoming those who believe in working hard, protecting our freedoms, contributing to society, following the rule of law, and who have a deep respect for other cultures and faiths different from their own, have long been a strength of our provincial culture and history. Equally as important, though, Canada's previous immigration policies under leaders like Prime Minister Stephen Harper, as an example, focused on ensuring that immigration levels matched our nation's economic needs and was commensurate with our ability to build enough houses and infrastructure to keep up with that growth. However, the Trudeau government's unrestrained open border policies, permitting well over 1 million newcomers each year into Canada, is causing significant challenges and has broken this delicate balance. These historically high immigration levels, especially as it relates to those with temporary visas, is exacerbating shortages in housing, job opportunities for young people, as well as health, education, and other social services infrastructure in a manner that is a severe challenge for all provinces to keep up with, including our own. This drives up the cost of living and strains public services for everyone, new Albertans, lifelong Albertans, and everyone in between. So I am joining with other premiers across our country in calling on the current federal government to immediately reintroduce sensible and restrained immigration policies, similar to levels we saw under Stephen Harper, so that all provinces have some time and resources to sustainably catch up with growth and to ensure those coming here closely align with our country's economic needs and our core values. And if the current federal government won't make these changes, our government will certainly support a new one that will.
You see, it's the immigrants. They're taking our housing. They're taking our jobs. Somewhere Matt Stone and Trey Parker are laughing their asses off for how prescient their particular brand of satire was, because Danielle Smith is leaning into all of the dog whistles, all of the tropes, in order to try to find someone to blame for decades of fiscal mismanagement. Because that's what it comes down to. You want to take a look at why the housing sector is what it is? A lot of different reasons for it. And certainly immigration's part of it. But it's not the only reason. There hasn't been as much housing starts. There hasn't been as much high density housing starts, which is one of the things that every successful city in pretty much the world has recognized as something they need to pursue. The notion that new immigrants are taking the jobs is a little contradictory, let's say. Because if you're going to say, we got all these people, they're coming to Alberta, they took our jobs, then what you're saying is there are people who are coming to Alberta who are more qualified. So I guess you're attracting the right kind of economic immigrant, as Danielle Smith likes to refer to them. So it's not that these new Canadians, these new immigrants are just showing up and leeching out of the system, because obviously if they're taking our jobs, they must be qualified to do the jobs. They're also taking a lot of jobs that a lot of Albertans, quite frankly, believe that they're above. So to say that immigrants are taking the jobs not only defeats the original argument, but it just doesn't make sense. Now, you might be thinking, just because that was a scripted, pre-recorded, televised thing, maybe that's not quite what she meant. Maybe you're reading too much into it. It's not like she repeated it the next day at the teachers' town hall, is it?
Just question whether we really, I think we really did in the last year and a half have a massive surge in newcomers coming to our province, as well as students. So I think part of what we were doing is, I've spoken with my K-12, or I've spoken with my infrastructure minister, and he's gone back, and we have been building 18 schools a year, which would have been, I think, able to allow us to keep up with growth in a normal situation. But we ended up with quite a dramatic surge that I don't think any of us really had anticipated. And that's part of the reason why, when we started hearing all of these pressures from all of the schools, I asked Dimitrios if he could work overtime over the summer with the infrastructure minister to come up with a new way so that we could accelerate the program. So that's where it came from, is that we really, I think, ended up with quite an acute condition just because of what has occurred in the last 18 months.
You have to admire, at the very least, you have to acknowledge the stones, the arrogance that it takes to say to a town hall of teachers, You know what? Education's been just fine up until the last 18 months, and it's really just the immigrants that made it so bad. Justin Trudeau, we were on track to have everything going just fine. There were no problems in education. That is... there's certain things that are just so outlandish that you wouldn't want to say to certain people. And I can't imagine saying to a teacher who has been teaching for anything more than 5 minutes in the province of Alberta, hey, you know what? Education was fine up until 18 months ago. It's so patently and demonstrably false. It's laughable. And it's quite frankly offensive that a premier of a province in front of, again, an audience of teachers would say education's been fine up until 18 months ago. But she did, again, lean into the trope of, it's the darn immigrants. And in case you're thinking, maybe I haven't convinced you, I haven't gotten you there yet. Danielle Smith appeared on, and I wish I was making this up, but I'm not, the Unacceptable Fringe podcast. It's a true thing. And she had some thoughts that she shared there as well.
We have done our part in Alberta with settling 70,000 Ukrainians. We certainly cannot absorb another 28,000 people who don't have jobs, don't have English language learning, need income supports, need a place to live. At this moment, we're full, and we have to make sure that the federal government respects us on that. We need a level of immigration that we can manage.
I would like to apologize to everybody who's currently listening to the show, particularly if you're a dog owner, because if your dog just started howling inexplicably, it's because of the dog whistle that was just played. Alberta is full. Danielle Smith at a town hall just a couple of weeks ago said that she was looking at ways at getting people to move from the urban centers to the rural centers to give rural Alberta more power, but Alberta is full. Just a few months ago, Danielle Smith, and you better believe we're playing that clip in a minute, Danielle Smith said that the province needed tens of thousands more workers to come to the province of Alberta. And the kicker to all of this, well, I'm going to share that in a second, because it wasn't just the Unacceptable Fringe podcast that Danielle Smith appeared on. She also found a little bit of time to hang out with everybody's favorite upside down version of Caillou. We like to call him Angry Caillou here at the show. And I'm going to do a little bit of an inside baseball backstory. So we pulled this clip, we edited it together. It's not edited in the sense anything more of we pulled it out. There's a beginning of an end. But we put the little graphics up. Our team did the things, and Angry Caillou got really angry at us because we used his clip. And then the best part of all of it was as he was making his jokes about the breakdown, his audience on the Twitter was like, well, you might want to lean into that. It kind of fits. But Danielle Smith appeared with none other than former white supremacist web store employee Cian Bexty, and they shared their thoughts.
That works. Canada has been fundamentally changed by Justin Trudeau's radical record on immigration. It's just spiraled out of control. Over 500,000 immigrants per year now, on top of asylum shoppers, whether it's refugees from Ukraine or an entire extended family following a single economic migrant from India. Support for immigration in Canada is at an all-time low, like totally at the bottom. Where do you stand on what Justin Trudeau is doing? Why are half of all Canadians, according to Angus Reid, wanting to fully close the borders to all new immigrants?
Well, he broke the public consensus because of his reckless approach to managing all of the different streams of programs. So immigration for economic reasons is the perfect type of immigration, because if you can match newcomers with the needs of an economy, and even use the temporary foreign worker program in a limited way as a pathway to permanent immigration. That's actually very supportive of what our various economies need. But that's not what they've done. They have massively increased the number of international students. They've massively increased the number of temporary foreign workers across all categories. They have massively increased the allowance for asylum seekers coming through our airports. That never used to be the case. There used to be 5,000 or 6,000 people coming into our airports each year. Last year it was over 40,000. This year we're on track to 60,000. What in the world's going on there? I think it's the relaxation of visa requirements when people are boarding planes. And then on top of that, they when you add all of those different categories, I believe I saw David Staples' column. It was something like 1.84 million people who came in 2023. There is just no possible way that any of our economies can absorb that. And so I'm open to lending a hand and having people come to Alberta and help us grow our economy. But we have spiking housing prices, spiking rental prices. I've just had to announce a massive school construction program because we ended up with 33,000 more students than we were expecting. We've got pressure in our hospitals. People don't have a family doctor. And then on top of that, newcomers are finding that they're showing up and either having to go to shelter spaces or living in campgrounds. So it's not working for anyone. And the way you end up with the national consensus on immigration is that people's own personal lives are not impacted when newcomers arrive. And I think that that's part of the reason why you're seeing the reaction. We've got to get a normal level of immigration, go back to the Stephen Harper levels that we had in the past. And I think they're beginning to realize it and they're trying to backtrack.
I think you're right about that. I definitely think that regular everyday Albertans who have been here for decades, if not generations, feel a little bit left behind when they're squeezing into an ER room, a hospital emergency room, or their kids are going to school and they're packed and they're wondering, why is this happening?
Now, there's a lot to unpack there. But there's one big theme that has to be addressed. And that's Danielle Smith talks about, hey, you know what? We want these economic immigrants. Those ones are cool. We love the economic immigrants. Students, though, man, what do they know? It's not like they've been accepted to post-secondary education and have to find some way to pay for it. It's not like they're contributing to the economy through those things. No, it's not. It's not that. It's the refugees. You see, we have all of these refugees that keep coming in, and we have an allowance for refugees. Canada is all of a sudden allowed to say to people who are fleeing persecution in other countries, sorry, we're full. I mean, I suppose if we use the Unacceptable Fringe podcast comments as a measure, Danielle Smith certainly believes that, but that's not the way that international law works. But here's the other really gross implication with Danielle Smith continually invoking the refugees as the reason. They're the wrong kind of immigrants. They're not the economic immigrants. Because the subtext to that statement is, they're just a bunch of useless knuckle draggers. They don't have any skills. They have nothing they contribute to the economy, and they're just dragging everybody down. That's the subtext. The subtext is the people who have fled countries like Ukraine, or any other country for that matter, they have no marketable skills. They are purely a drag on the Canadian economy, and they are purely a drag on the Alberta economy, and that is nothing short of unmitigated bullshit. And it's appalling that a premier who has, on varying degrees of time, leaned into her own persecution narratives, which have been, sidebar, pretty much universally proven false. But Danielle Smith was happy to say, hey, my great-grandfather on my grandfather's side, he fled to Canada to escape Soviet Russia because hardship and persecution. And so I feel you. It was bullshit. That was proven not to be true on a variety of levels. But she's willing to play that card. And where it makes it really gross is this is Danielle Smith just in March.
Our ability to offer permanent residency doesn't make much sense. That's why I've written to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today to ask for an increase in our nomination spaces for this year from less than 10,000 to 20,000 with immediate effect. In addition, we're asking for 10,000 new spaces specifically for Ukrainian evacuees. I should mention that even though we're only 12% of the population, we are getting 23% of the Ukrainian evacuees who are seeking refuge in our country. That's the reason why we want to have a special program that allows for us to settle them.
So let's be clear. Danielle Smith is doing an alt-right tour because she's trying to save her leadership. She's trying to make sure that at the leadership review in November, she's able to inflame enough hatred and bigotry that people who are bigots will come out and support her so she can get over the 50% mark. That is all that this is. And here's the takeaway that all of those bigots should be asking themselves. Here's the question that all of those bigots should be asking themselves. There's a couple of questions, actually. The first one might be, why is the Alberta is Calling website still up? Because as of the recording and airing of this show, it still is. It's still promising a $5,000 relocation bonus to people who have skills who move to Alberta. And again, if you're going to say that that doesn't include refugees, then you're operating from the assumption that the people who are fleeing places like the Ukraine are doing so with absolutely no education and absolutely no marketable skills, which is, again, patently false. So she's lying to you in the moment. But this is what Danielle Smith does. And this is why all of her supporters should take a deep breath and give their heads a shake, because she is no stranger to making promises that she has no intent or demonstrable pathway to follow through on.
Time to reflect upon the importance of discipline, devotion, humility, and sacrifice, and to reaffirm the bonds that draw communities together. And I appreciate you sharing your time with me during this special period. It is truly wonderful to be gathered this evening to celebrate in fellowship together. I have said for many years, and I found it interesting to hear the Imam talking about the foundation of your faith this evening, because I have talked about the foundation of conservatism being the individual, the family, the community, being built on freedom. After meeting and spending time with many of you, it is almost certainly true that these values are celebrated by Alberta Muslims as well. Now let's talk about something else I learned from my Muslim friends. The Islamic faith does not permit you to pay interest charges to a bank. But you are, I've learned a little bit about halal banking, you are permitted to pay banking service fees. I'm here to announce this evening to all of you that we are going to change our banking laws in Alberta to allow a financial institution to not only charge interest as they do now, but to introduce new service fee options that are in compliance with Muslim faith. This will reduce red tape, allow for a new banking product to bring more people into the financial market, further improving Alberta's economy. It's a win for Alberta's Muslims, and it's a win for Alberta's economy. I've also heard that it would be wonderful for you to have holidays that are recognized by your employers. I mean, they are called holidays because they are holy days, and we know that we recognize many in the Christian calendar, but every religion has a holy day, yours being Eid, that you would like to be able to have days off. I know that they do this in New York and in Maine, and so we are looking at how we would be able to create the legislation to allow that so that you could spend the day with your family.
That was Danielle Smith in May of 2023 promising Alberta Muslims that she would make sure that they got holidays. All that has to happen for them to have a holiday is she decides to make it so. Period. She has not done that. She made a promise that she clearly doesn't appear to have any intention of following through on, because she needed the votes from that particular demographic to try to get her over the edge in the provincial election. She also made the promise to introduce halal banking. Well, the problem, as we've talked about on previous episodes, is halal banking already exists. It's already offered in the province of Alberta. The only thing that she could do to change it would be to change the way that the Alberta Treasury branch does business and introduce Sharia law to make sure that any halal banking that was provided in the Alberta Treasury Branch portfolio met the requirements. She hasn't done that either. Danielle Smith is really, really good at making promises to people and using rhetoric to make people feel like they're being heard. But as soon as it becomes politically expedient to drop that, she absolutely does. So the question that all of the people who are getting excited by Danielle Smith punching down on newcomers, punching down on refugees, should be asking themselves is, if Danielle Smith is willing to roll the Muslim population of Alberta, what makes you so special that she won't? What makes you so special that she won't back away from this kind of rhetoric when it was just a few months ago that she was saying Alberta needed more immigration? Because she'd never do that to you, right? It's not like she had a GoFundMe that she promised she was going to do a bunch of stuff with, never delivered on those promises, and then donated it to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, apparently scoring herself a huge tax write-off on your dime. It's not like that happened, right? Moving on from there. We're only halfway. We're getting to the juicy stuff in just a couple minutes, though. But we got to talk about the healthcare situation in the province of Alberta, because there's couple really big pieces that haven't really been talked about all that much. Adriana LaGrange, Minister of Health, came out and she issued there's a little bit of shade maybe in the statement that she issued to Dr. Paul Parks. Dr. Paul Parks was the president of the Alberta Medical Association. He's finished his term. And Adriana LaGrange issued a statement. And in effect, the big quote here is the message that she was trying to send: we're making significant progress on a model that will be financially sustainable and supportive for both physicians and Albertans. Dr. Paul Parks and the AMA, they responded. I'm just going to read right from the response, because this response was zero punches pulled. So what Dr. Paul Parks and the AMA said in that response to Adriana LaGrange's statement: family medicine continues to be in crisis. Progress, their quotes, not mine, toward a new compensation model is not the same as implementing the new model. Implementation of the PCCM is needed now. The AMA has been working with government on a fair and sustainable model for family and rural generalist physicians, the Physician Comprehensive Care Model, or the PCCM model. The details of that model, including the model elements and rates, are complete. It's ready. We are solely awaiting approval from the Minister of Health to implement the model. The investment in primary care mentioned today by the Minister of Health was additional money provided by the federal government, the Government of Canada. While this investment is appreciated and valued, it does not absolve the Government of Alberta from properly funding the remaining amount needed to cover publicly funded health services for Alberta population. The Government of Alberta has not properly budgeted for the primary health care. And this is the theme. And this is something that we do here in Alberta. We don't properly spend the money, and then we get these big things to build up, and then we try to find creative solutions to deal with the fact that it's going to cost money to get ourselves out of these holes. Irony, of course, being is historically, Alberta has been one of, if not the richest provinces in Canada. But there's a couple of other things that we got to talk about, because, and we've raised this on the show quite a few times, and we're going to raise it again today, because this is where we're going to build the buildings isn't enough. And we have historical precedent for that. Talking about orthopedics at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. This is the delay, the service interruption, whatever you want to call it, that started back in July. Temporary physician shortage. Back in July, due to illness, leave, vacation, vacancies. Started on July 2nd, 2024. Now anticipated, and the end date has been bumped a few times. September 30th, 2024. That's when it's theoretically, hopefully, best case scenario, going to wrap up. But here's the problem with that. In 2010, this is the building. This is the building Alberta taxpayers built It was a designated orthopedic surgery building attached to the Royal Alexandra Hospital. We built the building and we didn't ensure that we had enough staff. This building is currently sitting empty. It is a state-of-the-art facility built in 2010. And because of staffing shortages, because the province of Alberta continues to go to war with physicians instead of recruiting them and creating an environment that they want to be a part of, this building sits empty. And I wish I was joking about this next part, because we have received multiple DMs from people who have said that members, representatives from Covenant Care have been touring the Royal Alex and they've been taking a close look at this building. The problem that we have in Alberta is we don't have enough doctors. It doesn't matter who employs the doctors, there's not enough doctors. And until we start to address the doctor shortage appropriately, until we start to address the healthcare worker shortage appropriately, it doesn't matter if Covenant Health is running things, or if Alberta Health Services is running things, or if Bob's Hospital Service is running things. If there's not enough people who want to do the jobs because of the toxic environment that the government of Alberta has fostered and continues to persist with, as we see in that release from the Alberta Medical Association, we're not going to solve any of these problems. And in fact, as we've discussed on the show before, bringing in folks like Covenant Health and giving them more spaces to occupy actually hinders access to healthcare, because Covenant Health won't provide the same sort of reproductive healthcare and access to things like the abortion drug or actual abortions that Alberta Health Services currently does. And we continue to do it. Because if we talk about the new cancer center that has been constructed in Calgary, how many new people have been hired to staff that massive new building? Well, right now, the plan is to close the Tom Baker Cancer Society or Cancer Center and move all of the services to the new center. So we're just rearranging chairs on the Titanic, to be clear. There are a few cancer beds from the Peter Loughy closing as well as moving over, and they've been granted, the whole cancer program has been granted a whole, wait for it, 4% uplift over 2022. There is no new staff or funding for the Arthur J.E. Child Comprehensive Cancer Center or the Calgary Cancer Center or the Alberta Cancer Center. They're just moving beds and existing staff. We keep building things and not doing the things that are needed to make sure those buildings provide the care that Albertans need and deserve. Big drink now. Because here we are, the moment you've all been waiting for, or at least some of you, I presume. Because we've been talking about this rabbit hole that exists with the corruption that exists in the current provincial government. That sounds like a pretty bold statement to make, doesn't it? There's corruption. Boy, I sure hope you'd be able to back that up if you're going to say something like that. We're at a point now where we feel pretty comfortable that we can back it up. And I want to be really, really clear before we go through all of the things that we're about to go through. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to be breaking this story down over the coming weeks because it's so big that if we tried to do, I mean, we're already an hour into the program and we've probably got at least another hour left. It's so big that if we tried to explain it all in one shot, everybody's heads would explode and it would just be too much. So we're going to do this in bits and pieces, digestible chunks, as it were. But I want to be very clear. What we're about to talk about tonight is just the tip of the iceberg. So let's start. Because that's what you've all been waiting for. And in order to start, in order to get the conversation that we need to have tonight going, we got to go all the way back to November of last year.
I want to be respectful of the position, but there are certain things that we have been told are that I cannot do. For instance, during the stampede, I was told I could only be in the suites for 20 minutes at a time. When I receive ribbon skirts as a matter of protocol, it's been questioned whether I'm allowed to keep them. They're probably only valued at $40. Been told I can't do dishes in my husband's restaurant, even though I'm volunteering to do that. So I just have to say that I think that there are some tweaks we may need.
Tweaks that we need to make. Just tweaks. No big deal. Except it's a little bit more than tweaks that Danielle Smith made. So let's talk about what the big changes were that Danielle Smith made, because there's some really, really important ones that we got to talk about. The first one is there were some legislative changes that Danielle Smith made. And she justified those in a conversation with the 1%ers. Oh my gosh, how did we miss that joke up until now? The 1%ers, the Rebel News.
That I attend where there's no ticket charge, where they're free, and I love to go to many of those events. There's some events that do have a ticket charge to them, and I'll be judicious about it. I'll take feedback from the public about what they think is appropriate and what's not, and we'll see if we need to tighten up the rules. But I think what I've seen is that people want me to be out celebrating with them. They want me to be there, whether it's an air show or whether it's a charity fundraiser, or whether it's a hockey game in Edmonton or a hockey game in my own riding. People want me to take part in celebrating with them. So I want to be able to keep on doing that.
So Danielle Smith really wanted to go to the skyboxes. She wanted to spend more than 20 minutes at a time. She wanted to be with the people at the events, don't you see? And so she made some pretty major legislative changes. One of the first things that she did was she increased the amount that MLAs or elected officials can accept. So if it's under $250, then they don't have to do anything. They can just say, thank you very much. And that's it. If it's greater than $250, but less than $1,000, then they need to record that information and kick that to the ethics commissioner. If it's more than $1,000, they need to record the information and report it within 60 days. Same thing applies in effect for their family. So the first thing that we have to discuss is there used to be a cap for the amount of gifts that MLAs or elected officials could accept. There's no cap anymore. But it wasn't just the changes for MLAs and elected officials. And this is the crux of what the one small piece that we're going to talk about tonight, because she also made changes directly. This is Danielle Smith's signature on this document. She made changes to the rules for staffers. And when we take a look at the fine print of that, when it comes to acceptance of fees, gifts, or other benefits, which in theory means anything that a person would be given. Subject to Clause B, members of the Premier's and Minister's staff shall not accept from any individual, organization, or corporation fees, gifts, or other benefits that are connected directly or indirectly with the performance of their duties. So if it's in any way tied to any kind of government business, they're not supposed to accept gifts of any kind, period, end of sentence, unless we have these two little qualifiers. Members of the Premier's and Minister's staff may accept a fee, gift, or other benefit as an incident of protocol of the social obligations that normally accompany employment with the office of the Premier or the office of a cabinet minister if the value of the fee, gift, or other benefit does not exceed $500. A ticket or invitation to an event or conference that is connected directly with the performance of their duties if the value of the ticket or invitation does not exceed $500. So if it's less than $500 and they're there in an official capacity, they're there doing the work of supporting the minister, then they're allowed to accept less than $500. But if it's over $500, members of the Premier and Minister staff may accept a fee, gift, or other benefit referred to in Clause B1 or a ticket or invitation referred to in Clause B2 that exceeds $500 in value after receiving approval from the Premier's Chief of Staff. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. Because the first question that you should be asking is, okay, so the Premier's Chief of Staff, if somebody wants to accept more than something worth $500, then the Chief of Staff has to approve that. The next question should be, what if it's the Chief of Staff who wants to accept a gift more than $500? Well, it would seem that the sole person, according to the regulations that Danielle Smith wrote and signed, who determines whether or not the chief of staff can accept gifts more than $500 is the chief of staff himself. So there's no conflict of interest there. Nope. No ethical issues there. Nope. But what was the justification for these changes? What was the reason that these changes were needed? Let's ask, I don't know, a certain finance minister. Maybe we could ask Nate Horner.
You said you're happy with the conflict of interest rules as they are. You think they're adequate. Can you explain to Albertans why you think staff members should be able to accept gifts, including potentially from somebody who's involved with government contracts, multi-million-dollar government contracts? Why should those not be disclosed, those gifts disclosed to Albertans?
Well, I would just say I think the premier, some of the motivation behind changing it was so that she could be staffed at events, because under the prior iteration of the rules, she had a hard time actually getting into events and being staffed. It wouldn't be reasonable for her to attend an event where she couldn't have staff with her. So that was some of the motivation to change the rules. I hope that answers your question.
Well, if it's perfectly reasonable for staff to attend with ministers and with the premier to these events, if it's important that you guys attend these events, why not just disclose? Why not disclose it? Like, that's the ultimate question that I don't understand why the reason, what the reasoning is behind not disclosing that. If there's nothing wrong with it, why not disclose it proactively?
Well, it's a conversation that I guess we're having here. If there's more changes that need to be made, I'm sure they'll take that into consideration.
Thank you. We'll go to the phones.
You're the senior cabinet
We'll come back
minister.
to the floor after some questions from the phone. Operator, can you please put through our first caller?
I love that little exchange there. But the moral of the story is Minister of Finance Nate Horner said it himself. Danielle Smith wants to go to these events. She wants to be able to be staffed at these events, which brings us to semifinal hockey game, game 2 in Vancouver on May 10th, 2024. This is the picture that made the rounds. Danielle Smith. A lot of people in this picture. A lot of fascinating names in this picture. We've got David Eby there. He's the boss of the BC over there. But we have some other people in this picture as well. And it's worth taking a moment to talk about who some of these people have been identified as. Because in addition to Danielle Smith, sitting just beside her executive director of communications, Rebecca Polak, we also have some names that are going to get to be really important as we unpack this whole debacle over the coming weeks. Because right behind Danielle Smith, sitting in that same box, we have Sam Raish of Tylenol fame. We have the president of the Métis Nation of Alberta. We have David Eby. Like I said, we got Rebecca Polak right there. Some big names in that booth in Vancouver on May 10th. So how did Danielle Smith get there with all of those people? Well, fortunately, there's a bit of a public record when it comes to that. According to a July 19th article by the Globe and Mail, they were given to Smith by Invest Alberta board member Sam Jaber, and his accounting firm, Jaberson Associates. To read from the article, Premier Danielle Smith attended a hockey game on personal time. It's personal time. So it's not an official event, apparently. None of her expenses were paid for by the government of Alberta. Oh, so the tickets, where did they come from? Sam Blackett, her spokesperson, told the Globe in a statement on May 13th. Premier Smith traveled with 2 staff, both paid their own expenses. For the travel, presumably. The hockey tickets were provided by a private citizen. All rules under the Alberta Conflicts of Interest Act were followed. We're going to get to that. Jaber and his accounting tax firm, Jaberson Associates, gave the premier the tickets according to the Globe's source. Additionally, in another story published by the Globe in July, Jimmy Smith, a spokesperson for David Eby, said Alberta's premier invited BC's premier to the game in Vancouver. Mr. Eby attended with his wife, son, and 2 staff members, the May 23rd statement said. Premier Smith's office also invited a family from BC who otherwise wouldn't have been able to attend so they could enjoy the experience, the statement said. Premier Smith and Premier Eby had a friendly conversation throughout the game and a brief informal conversation on shared priorities during the intermission. So these are tickets that the Premier of BC would not have been able to acquire on his own. That makes these tickets presumably some pretty high value tickets. But here's the problem. The first of many. Either Smith was staffed or she wasn't. If she was staffed, if she needed her staff to come with her, why did the staff pay for their own airfare? And if she wasn't staffed, if she was just going to the game with some of her besties, with tickets that she was given by Sam Jaber, that's a violation of the first part of those regulations. Let's go back. Subject to Clause B, members of the Premier, Minister, staff shall not accept from any individual, organization, or corporation fees, gifts, or other benefits that are connected directly or indirectly with the performance of their duties. So, if it wasn't an official event, if those staffers weren't there staffing Danielle Smith, it was a violation of the rules for them to accept those tickets. Period. But this brings up another question. Who is Sam Jaber? And for tonight, just for tonight, we're going to say he's an accountant from the Edmonton area. But there's a lot to unpack with Mr. Jaber. But there's one thing for tonight that's important to know. And it's particularly pertinent to tonight's conversation because Sam Jaber was appointed to the board of Invest Alberta on November 22nd, 2023 by Danielle Smith. Invest Alberta is a crown corporation, which in effect makes Mr. Jaber an employee of Danielle Smith. And even if you don't believe that it's a wild conflict of interest for subordinates to provide lavish gifts to their bosses because that represents a wild conflict of interest, it does. Just imagine what would happen if Mr. Jaber was suddenly appointed board chair by Danielle Smith, who has the power to do that. You don't have to look any farther to realize that there is a very real risk of conflict of interest. But let's take a look at what some other organizations have to say about conflicts of interests and ethics, perhaps. Let's go to a government agency because presumably that would overlap. So going and looking at the Alberta Health Services conflict of interest when it comes to receipts of gifts. AHS representatives may not accept fees, gifts, or other benefits that are connected directly or indirectly with the performance of their AHS duties from any other person other than the normal exchange of hospitality between persons doing business together, tokens exchanged as part of protocol, but not limited, included but not limited to a gift from a patient, a gift from family, friends, or patient, normal presentation of gifts to persons participating in public functions, awards, speeches, lectures, presentations, or seminars. But there's a dollar value that gets to be real important real quick. The maximum commercial value of any one-time gift, hospitality, or other benefit accepted by an AHS representative must not exceed $100. The total maximum commercial value of any gifts, hospitality, or other benefits accepted by an AHS representative under sections A1 to AC within a calendar year from one source must not exceed $200. That's a government organization. And the rules are clear. You can't accept more than $200 from one source in a calendar year. But here we have Danielle Smith coming into, apparently, a box of seats, compliments of Sam Jaber and Associates, an employee of hers, and her then regifting them to the Premier of BC and apparently to her staff as well. But we don't even have to just rely on the Code of Ethics for Alberta Health Services to determine whether or not this is maybe a little morally shady, maybe a little ethically shady, because it turns out Invest Alberta has their own Code of Ethics as well. And when we take a look at that one, it's pretty clear. Employees or directors shall not accept gifts, hospitality, or other benefits that are or may be perceived as being connected directly or indirectly with the performance of their duties from any individual or organization. Gifts, hospitality, or other benefits may not be of such a nature that could have a real, apparent, or potential influence on the employee or director's objectivity and impartiality in performing their duties on behalf of the Invest Alberta Corporation. The value of gift or benefit permitted shall not exceed $100 Canadian in value from one source per Canada year. The value of a single event invitation, inclusive of admission, travel fees, hospitality, and accommodation, shall not exceed $200. The total value of all event invitations received by the covered individual in a calendar year from a single source shall not exceed $400 Canadian. So even Invest Alberta recognizes that there should be limitations for the value of gifts that are given. That's the Invest Alberta Code of Conduct that I just read to you. Now, there's a lot more to Sam Jaber. And we're either going to be seeing a much more detailed conversation about him in the mainstream media shortly, or we'll be talking about him soon. But tonight, we're here to talk about primarily one thing: Danielle Smith's staffers. Because let's be clear, Danielle Smith was gifted a block of tickets by Sam Jaber's accounting firm. Danielle Smith then invited Dave Eby to attend the game, and in addition, she brought two staffers with her. Travel was reportedly paid for by individuals, but what that means is the Premier of Alberta regifted two Skybox playoff tickets to two staffers. And what are those tickets presumably valued at? When tickets went on for the semifinals, went on sale, according to an article that went up right when tickets went for sale. The cheapest ones, the worst tickets in the house, started at $250. Standard tickets and more expensive seats started at $700. Smith and Company were in an elite Skybox. So it's not a stretch to assume, given that the more expensive seats were $700, that the elite Skybox seats were at least $700 each. That's not a stretch. So given all of that, what do we know? Well, we know that Smith attended multiple playoff games, one in Vancouver and then at least two playoff games in Edmonton with gifted tickets. We know for sure that Smith was accompanied by at least two staffers to one game, and it stands to reason that she would have been staffed potentially or accompanied, depending on how we're choosing to file these gifts of tickets for the other two. Because again, Nate Horner literally said the whole reason why Danielle Smith made these changes was so that she could bring the staffers to the events. She gets lonely. Especially given that in multiple reports from multiple outlets, at least four other ministers attended playoff games. And it's reasonable to assume that in at least some of them, they had been staffed as well. Again, given multiple reports from multiple outlets placing staffers in Skybox suites during playoff games. And this is where the cover-up really starts to become crystal clear. But don't worry, we're going to spell it out. The Edmonton Journal has inquired with each ministry. Journalist Matthew Black has inquired. He has sent emails to every single ministry, including the Premier's office, saying, hey, who went to the games? What were the tickets worth? Would love to know. He's not received a single response, but he hasn't just done it once. He's done it twice. And neither time has he received a single response. So it's very clear at this point that the government, Danielle Smith's UCP government, doesn't want people to know who went. But we thought, what if we come at it another way? There's a great episode of a science fiction show, the values of which Danielle Smith's government would do well to ascribe to. I'm pretty sure it's Star Trek. I was younger when I watched it. But in this particular episode, they were trying to figure out how they're going to find a cloaked ship. See, there was this other ship, and it was cloaked, and that means that they couldn't see it if you're not a big Trekker or Trekkie. And so this other ship was just beating the holy hell out of them because they couldn't see it. And eventually what they realized was that instead of looking for the ship, they should look for where the stars weren't. And they hit that ship. And that strategy still works. As I'm saying this, we have just tweeted out a copy of a FOIP that we filed. And what we asked for in that FOIP goes back to the rules and regulations that Danielle Smith wrote and signed off herself. Because if you go back to the rules and regulations that Smith's own office wrote, any gifts over $500 have to be approved by the Premier's Chief of Staff. So we wondered, how many times has the Premier's Chief of Staff approved these exorbitant and expensive gifts? Because you would think, given the fact that they have a policy for this whole process, they recognize that not having a record of these things would leave a huge conflict of interest. Because otherwise, what would the point of having these regulations be if you don't have a paper trail where you can say, no, it's cool. Becca, she asked Marshall. Marshall said it was fine. It's all good. It's no big deal. The chief of staff approved it. Maybe he even approved his own tickets. Because if it's just the Wild West and anyone can give expensive gifts to the staffers, getting their influence, and by extension of that, the influence of their ministers, that would represent a complete lack of code of conduct and an utter ethical vacuum, right? So we FOIP'd it. And what we got back legitimately shocked us. Now, you might remember a little while back, we did a FOIP where we had we were requested to know who was all involved in Danielle Smith's consultations for her anti-trans, anti-parental choice, anti-medical choice policies. And of the hundreds and hundreds of pages that were relevant, most of those hundreds and hundreds of pages, they deemed that those pages needed to be protected. So they acknowledged that those records existed, but they just said, you can't have them. We've got reasons. You can't have them. The pages that we did get often had huge chunks blacked out where there was privileged information. So they said, you can't be trusted with that information. We don't want the taxpayers of Alberta to know about that information. So we know when there's information that the government deems that they want to hold on to, they'll just redact it. This is the FOIP. This is what we got back. The question that we asked, I am seeking all records as defined by Section 1Q of the Act related to any and all exemptions or approvals by the Premier's Chief of Staff in regards to staff members of ministers, MLAs, and the Premier accepting gifts above the value of $500, included for the Chief of Staff and Marshall Smith himself. Please provide the amounts and dates for these exemptions as well as the staff members who received approval for these gifts above and beyond $500. We asked for it for the beginning of that new policy up until the date that we filed the FOIP. So to be clear, what we asked for was all records of all of the gifts that had been approved. The response that we got, a thorough search conducted by Executive Council staff did not yield any records responsive to your request. So what they mean when they're saying that is there are no records of any gifts that have ever been approved. Period. There are no records that exist. It's not that the records were redacted. It's not that the records were withheld. It's that there are no records of any approvals for any gifts. Period. So there's no record that exists, despite the fact that this picture right here shows at least one staffer with Smith in seats at a game that all evidence shows the ticket value exceeded $500, despite the fact that the Premier's own office confirms that 2 staffers attended that game. And again, even if Smith was the source of these tickets, as per the regulations that her office wrote, those tickets should still have been approved as gifts to staffers. So no matter what, no matter how you choose to slice this, Smith's staffs violated the UCP's own ethics rules, period. We don't need to speculate on that, because if they accepted the gifts and they weren't part of their official duties, they violated the act. If they accepted the gifts and they were part of their official duties, there's no record of any approval for the acceptance of those gifts, which means they violated the rules. There's only a few interpretations of what this can all mean. One is the fact that Smith chooses skybox seats over the regular tickets shows that she's not even interested in being with the people. She says, the people, they want to see me. They want to know that I'm with them. They want to know that I'm there. But she doesn't want to sit in the regular seats. She doesn't want to sit with the plebs. She's above that. She wants the fancy seats. She wants the skybox seats. She's not just saying that she's above regular Albertans. She's saying that she's above the rules that she wrote for herself. And if Smith will allow for her office to completely disregard the rules that her office wrote, they made these rules what they wanted them to be. How can any Albertans believe for any amount of time that she will follow any rules that constrain her power? Guardrails are supposed to exist to prevent people from abusing power. Smith hasn't just disassembled the guardrails with her changes to the ethics rules. She wrote the rules. She rewrote the rules. And it appears that she's just driven over the very rules that she wrote. A conflict of interest is defined when, as a public office holder, exercises an official power, duty, or function that provides an opportunity to further his or her private interests or those of his or her relatives or friends, or to improperly further another person's private interests. That's the literal definition of a conflict of interest. Even if you ignore the fact that Smith changing the conflict of interest to suit her needs in and of itself meets the definition of a conflict of interest. Smith has been clear. Getting access to events, elite access to events, is in her private interest. She literally has cited that as the reasons for changing the act. Accepting the tickets to Vancouver or any other games in an unofficial capacity is a conflict of interest. If Smith wasn't on center ice, dropping the puck, or singing the national anthem, or even as being pointed out as a premier present at the games, she can't make the argument that she was performing a duty of her office, period. And neither can any of the other ministers, for that matter. She changed the rules so she could access sports tickets in a manner in which former ethics commissioners and former lawmakers believed was improper. That means that accepting a ticket from anyone is a conflict of interest for, at the very least, her, because she places such a high value on them. It doesn't matter that she has used her authority to rewrite the laws. They broke the rules. They broke the rules that they wrote. Now this is just, like I said, this ain't the ball game. This is just the first inning, because this thing goes so much deeper and it gets so much worse. So we're going to continue the deep dive on this whole scandal over the coming weeks. But here's an important question for people to ponder and to think about. If Danielle Smith was, in fact, gifted the entire skybox, and if Danielle Smith did indeed invite the people who were in that skybox as she invited David Eby, why are some of the other people in that skybox? Because, as we said, not only is the current president of the Métis Nation reportedly been identified in that photo, Sam Raish, the man who facilitated the Turkish Tylenol that cost Albertans almost $100 million in medication that was dangerous for feeding tubes for babies in the NICU, is also in that photo after that whole debacle had already unfolded. The other question is, if Smith didn't bring Sam Raish along for the game, who did? Wonder if there's a connection there. One other little topic that we want to hit on to round the night out, and that is, people have been asking, what do we do? What do we do? There's so much corruption. They don't even follow their own rules. They make up lies to try to cover up things after the fact. They refuse to be accountable for anything. They've literally rewritten the laws so that Alberta has some of the most lenient conflict of interest rules in the country, if not the world, for places that have conflict of interest laws. The laws that exist for MLAs and ministers and the premier are looser than the laws that exist for any other government organization. Why is it that these other government organizations recognize that if you let the people have the opportunity to abuse the power, they'll abuse it? What do we do? Now, there's a bunch of different answers to that questions. I maintain, as I have for a while now, regardless of who's in government, the first thing you have to do is get loud. Well, what does getting loud mean? What does getting loud look like? It means going to rallies. It means letting people know. The people that Danielle Smith is punching down on, whether it's LGBTQ2S plus youth, whether it's refugees, whether it's newcomers, letting them know that you do not share the views of the Premier of Alberta. Letting people know that you believe the more power that you have, the more constraints need to be in place to ensure that when you exercise that power, you do exercise it responsibly. What else can you do? Well, we've been floating this idea for a while now, because there really is only one shot at Danielle Smith, and that is at the upcoming UCP leadership review. That's going to be held in Red Deer. It's in Red Deer. Apparently last week or 2 weeks ago, I may have said Lethbridge. Sorry, everybody. It's in Red Deer. It's very central. There's this UCP leadership review that's going on in Red Deer. And if you buy a UCP membership and you attend that UCP leadership review, the early bird tickets are on sale, I think, till October 6th. Then for $200, you can go and you can send a message to the Premier of Alberta that you will not tolerate this in the province. It's pretty easy to do. If you have the means, if you have $200 extra, and I realize a lot of people don't. If you don't, you don't. That's okay. Don't feel bad about that. But if you do, if you can't afford that $200 to go to Red Deer and send a message, and you just can't get yourself to do it, what you're saying is the lives of those trans kids that Danielle Smith is punching down on, that experts have agreed we're going to see deaths from suicide because of her policies. That's not worth $200 for you. That trans kid's life is not worth $200 for you. Alberta is a province that has seen an alarming rise in hate crimes. hate crimes are emboldened by the kind of rhetoric that the Premier of Alberta is using. So if you have that $200 and you choose not to utilize it to send a message to the Premier of Alberta, you're saying that if somebody with skin that's not white gets beat down in an alley somewhere, that's not worth $200 to stop. Let's be very, very clear. When we're talking about the expansion of private education in the province of Alberta with public dollars, that is setting up a two-tiered system where the wealthy are going to have more opportunities for their kids because they can afford it, and the money that should be going to support the public system that everybody should have equal access to isn't going to be going there anymore because it's going to be buying the rich people the buildings now. It's going to be buying the specialized religious schools the buildings now. It is funneling money away from the public system, period. If that's not worth $200 to try and stop, I don't know what to tell you. But there's even a counter argument. And this is fascinating. And this, to me, speaks to what's going on in the province of Alberta as much as anything else that we've talked tonight, perhaps a little bit more, because we were sent this message. Now, the names here have been redacted because reasons, and it's important. Dear so-and-so, it has come to our attention that you recently purchased a membership in the United Conservative Party of Alberta. Welcome. While welcoming of all Albertans who share our principles and goals, we would be remiss in asking if this purchase had been made to a change of heart. Elections Alberta shows you've donated to the NDP in the past, and your social media is replete with commentary in opposition to the UCP. The requirement of being a member of the UCP is to support the principles of the association. Your previous support of the NDP does not seem to indicate you meet this requirement. Could you please respond to this email indicating your support of the party, or we will be forced to continue all other contrary evidence in maintaining a current membership? So let's be clear what we're talking about here, because that is the United Conservative Party saying, hey, we're checking memberships now. We're doing purity tests now. We've just approved as a party this Bill of Rights that say that you shouldn't be profiled, but we're profiling your ass off. Now, here's my argument. Even if you don't agree with the principles of the UCP, and maybe you don't have the $200 to buy the membership and the Red Deer. It's in Red Deer. It's not anywhere else but Red Deer. You don't have the money to go to Red Deer. You don't have the money to get the early bird ticket. That's cool. But this seems like a really fun way to screw with some authoritarians, because if the UCP is now doing purity tests on who applies for its membership, I can think of no better value for my $10, $25, whatever the membership fee is, than to apply to be a member of the UCP party and have them vet me. That sounds like a boatload of fun, because if they refuse me, I get my money back. And if they don't refuse me, then I can go on and maybe go ahead to send a message to the Premier of Alberta. But here's the kicker to this whole piece before we get to the plugs and the last little bit of fun. I wonder if there's somebody out there who could eloquently speak to the type of entitlement, the type of rule breaking, the type of privilege that we're now seeing from the Alberta Premier's office. If only there was somebody who could either demonstrate that they have a firm grasp of those principles, or perhaps demonstrate that they'll say whatever is most expedient in the moment.
When Albertans see this kind of personal pampering and self-service in their leaders, they lose faith not only in that individual, but in the political and democratic process itself. The lasting effect of this kind of entitlement is a cynical public that believes the worst instead of hoping for the best. We should see the very best of our values and the very brightest of our intentions reflected in our leaders. It's a shame this Premier has let us down. Mr. Speaker, Albertans deserve better.
The Honourable Member Highlands Norwood.
Boy, she can read a script, can't she? If only she meant those words. Now we get to the plugs, and then the last little bit of fun. We're at the 2-hour mark already, so we're going to skip the call-in for tonight, and we'll do the call-in thing again next week because it's just too much. So, a couple of plugs that we want to throw out here. First of all, we have got the timing of this episode was so good because we scheduled another interview episode with somebody literally we scheduled weeks ago, but we scheduled it with somebody who she's got some knowledge, the working of the things. And then the announcement came that Danielle Smith was going to be making an education announcement. And then she made the education announcement. And so this Wednesday, we're going to be very excited to present publicly a conversation with ATA Local 38 President Stephanie Clements. Stephanie's been on the show about a year ago. We're trying to make September all about education. And so not only do we have a fascinating and fun conversation about the state of education, and we get Stephanie's response to Smith's claims that education has only been in trouble for the last 18 months. But we also have her take on this new funding piece, as well as a bunch of other really important things. So if you care about education, that's going to be an episode that you absolutely don't want to miss. And that episode is going to be up for our Patreon sponsors tomorrow evening, which now brings the plugs of the things and the stuff. We're able to do the FOIPs that we do and the deep divey stuff that we do because of the support of our Patreon sponsors. So if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love nothing more if you signed up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/TheBreakdownAB, where for a small amount of money a month, you can help us do these things that we do where we file FOIPs so that we can prove that the government of Alberta is breaking their own rules. It's you guys that make that happen. So you can sign up to be one of our Patreon supporters there. If you are afraid of long-term commitments, then you can also just send an e-transfer straight to info@thebreakdownab.ca. We are a company now. We're an official entity. We're not journalists, though, and we don't claim to be. So we're part of we're in the same category as the Rebel News. We just try to be a little bit more informed and slightly less gross. So that's the plugs for the things and the stuff. We're also trying to figure out. We're going to do a contest here. And we're trying to figure out a fun way to that. So if you got any ideas for a contest that you'd like to see, we have some super dope prizes that we're excited to share. Our Patreon sponsors, supporters already have our patrons, I think is the verbiage I should be using. They already have their own little special contest. But we're going to do a public facing contest as well, just for fun, because somebody gave us some stuff to give away. So we're going to give it away in a fun way. And it's going to be super awesome when we do. So if you have ideas for contests, throw them in the chat. I want to say a big, huge thank to the whole chat tonight. I'm going to read through it. It was a 2-hour episode, so there's a lot, but the community that we have here is absolutely amazing, and I love to see it. So I'm going to go through there because I think it's going to be fantastic, and just fills my cup up. So all of that being said, there's something else that fills my cup up, and longtime viewers of the show know exactly what's coming next, because we got to leave it on a high note.
I tend to be pretty trusting.
It just never gets old. I don't know why. I don't know how I can enjoy that as much as I do every single time. But my God, that second nod, it's perfect. You have to love it so much. That's it for us for this week. We'll be back with another live episode, and look for our conversation with ATA President of Local 38, Stephanie Clements, on Wednesday. In the meantime, and in between time, smash that like and subscribe button. I did the review thing for the podcast too. If you want to do a review, that's cool. If you're listening to the audio version. And like I said, the deep dive that we did tonight on the FOIP that we got back is just the first step. Again, we've handed off a bunch of stuff to the good folks, the mainstream media, the real journalists. We're hoping they start to pick up and run with some of it. And if they don't, then we will. So either we get to comment on their stuff or we're going to show you some more of our FOIPs and other things. So take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the conversation going.